viewers, and welcome to another chapter of reading. Before I begin, I would like to address two things. One, it is my friend Aurik's birthday, so happy birthday to you. And two, happy International Cat Day, cats around the globe. To celebrate, I am wearing a cat shirt, a cat necklace, cat earrings, and a cat ring, and a cat ear headband. I'm also displaying a cat painting that has been on my wall since I was 8, and we are accompanied by my darling Lucky, who is providing this cameo, as well as his sister, my darling Corinne. So, once again, happy International Cat Day to cats around the globe. Now, let's get started, shall we? Chapter 9. The Woes of Mrs. Weasley. Dumbledore's abrupt departure took Harry completely by surprise. He remained sitting where he was in the chair, struggling with his feelings of shock and relief. The Wizengamot were all getting to their feet, talking, gathering up their papers, and packing them away. Harry stood up. Nobody seemed to be paying him the slightest bit of attention, except the toad-like witch on Fudge's right, who was now gazing down at him instead of at Dumbledore. That's just the start of her antics. Advanced Potterheads know what I mean. Newcomers, you're gonna have to wait. Ignoring her, he tried to catch Fudge's eye, or Madame Bones, wanting to ask whether he was free to go. But Fudge seemed quite determined to not notice Harry, and Madame Bones was busy with her briefcase, so he took a few tentative steps toward the exit, and when nobody called him back, broke into a very fast walk. He took the last few steps at a run, wrenched open the door, and almost collided with Mr. Weasley, who was standing right outside, looking pale and apprehensive. Dumbledore didn't sigh. "Cleared," Harry said, pulling the door closed behind him. "Of all charges!" Beaming, Mr. Weasley seized Harry by the shoulders. "Harry, that's wonderful! But of course they couldn't have found you guilty, not on the evidence. But even so, I can't pretend I wasn't." But Mr. Weasley broke off, because the courtroom door had just opened again. The Wizengamot were filing out. "Heavens, Baird," Mr. Weasley said wonderingly, pulling Harry aside to let them all pass. "You were tried by the full court." "I think so," said Harry quietly. "If I were tried by a full court, that would give me an anxiety attack." I don't know about you guys. One or two of the passing wizards nodded to Harry as they passed, and a few, including Madame Bones, said, "Morning, Arthur," to Mr. Weasley. But most averted their eyes. Cornelius Fudge and the toad-like witch were almost the last to leave the dungeon. Fudge acted as though Mr. Weasley and Harry were part of the wall. But again, the witch looked almost appraisingly at Harry as she passed. Last of all to pass was Percy. Like Fudge, he completely ignored his father and Harry. He marched past clutching a large roll of parchment and a handful of spare quills, his back rigid and his nose in the air. The lines around Mr. Weasley's mouth tightened slightly, but other than this, he gave no sign that he had noticed his third son. I'm going to take you straight back so you can tell the others the good news, he said, beckoning Harry forward as Percy's heels disappeared up the stairs to the ninth level. I'll drop you off on the way to that toilet in Bethnal Green. Come on. So, what will you have to do about the toilet? Harry asked, grinning. Everything suddenly seemed 5 times funnier than usual. It was starting to sink in. He was cleared. He was going back to Hogwarts. Oh, it's a simple enough answer, Jinx, said Mr. Weasley as they mounted the stairs. But it's not so much having to repair the damage. It's more the attitude behind the vandalism, Harry. Michael Beatty might strike some wizards as funny, but it's an expression of something much deeper and nastier. I, for one... Mr. Weasley broke off in mid-sentence. They had just reached the ninth level corridor, and Cornelius Fudge was standing a few feet away from them, talking quietly to a tall man with sleek blonde hair and a pointed, pale face. The second man turned at the sound of their footsteps. He too broke off in mid-conversation. His cold gray eyes narrowed and fixed upon Harry's face. Well, 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 Patronus Potter, said Lucius Malfoy coolly. Harry felt winded, as though he had just walked into something heavy. He had last seen those cool gray eyes through slits in the Death Eater's hood, and last heard that man's voice jeering in a dark graveyard while Lord Voldemort tortured him. He could not believe that Lucius Malfoy dared look him in the face. He could not believe that he was here in the Ministry of Magic, or that Cornelius Fudge was talking to him. When Harry had told Fudge mere weeks ago that Malfoy was a Death Eater. The minister was just telling me about your lucky escape, Potter, drawled Mr. Malfoy. Quite astonishing the way you continue to wriggle out of fairy titles. Snake-like, in fact. Mr. Weasley gripped Harry's shoulder in warning. Yeah, said Harry. Yeah, I'm good at escaping. And I seem to be good at yawning through these chapters. But nonetheless, I persevere because you guys deserve to hear it. Lucius Malfoy raised his eyes to Mr. Weasley's face. And Arthur Weasley, too. What are you doing here, Arthur? I work here, said Mr. Weasley shortly. Not here, surely, said Mr. Malfoy, raising his eyebrows. Oops. And glancing toward the door over Mr. Weasley's shoulder. I thought you were up on the second floor. Don't you do something about that involves sneaking Muggle artifacts home and bewitching them? No, said Mr. Weasley curtly, his fingers now biting into Harry's shoulder. What are you doing here anyway? Harry asked Lucius Malfoy. I don't think private matters between myself and the minister are any concern of yours, Potter, said Malfoy, smoothing the front of his robes. Harry distinctly heard the gentle clinking of what sounded like a pocket full of gold. Really, just because you are Dumbledore's favourite boy, you must not expect the same indulgence from the rest of us. Shall we go up to your office then, Minister? Certainly, said Fudge, turning his back on Harry and Mr. Weasley. This way, Lucius. They strode off together, talking in low voices. Mr. Weasley did not let go of Harry's shoulder until they had disappeared into the lift. Why wasn't he waiting outside Fudge's office if they've got business to do together? A very good point. Harry burst out furiously. What was he doing down here? Trying to sneak down to the courtroom, if you ask me, said Mr. Weasley, looking extremely agitated as he glanced over his shoulder, as though making sure they could not be overheard. Trying to find out whether you've been expelled or not. I'll leave a note for Dumbledore when I drop you off. You ought to know Malfoy's been talking to Fudge again. What private business have they got together anyway? Gold, I expect, said Mr. Weasley angrily. Malfoy's been giving generously to all sorts of things for years. Gets him in with the right people. Then he can ask favors. Delay laws he doesn't want passed. Oh, he's very well connected, Lucius Malfoy. The lift arrived. It was empty except for a flock of memos that flapped around Mr. Weasley's head as he pressed the button for the atrium, and the doors clanged shut. He waved him away irritably. Mr. Weasley, said Harry slowly, if Fudge is meeting Death Eaters like Malfoy, if he's seeing them alone, how do we know they put the Imperious Curse on him? Yet another very good point. Don't think it hadn't occurred to us, Harry, muttered Mr. Weasley. But Dumbledore thinks Fudge is acting of his own accord at the moment, which, as Dumbledore says, is not a lot of comfort. Let's not talk about it any more just now, Harry. The door slid open and they stepped down to the now almost deserted atrium. Aurik, the security man, was behind his daily profit again. They had walked straight past the golden fountain before Harry remembered. Wait, he told Mr. Weasley, and pulling his money bag from his pocket, he turned back to the fountain. He looked up at the handsome wizard's face, but up close, Harry thought he looked rather weak and foolish. The witch was wearing a vapid smile like a beauty contestant, and from what Harry knew of goblins and centaurs, they were most unlikely to be caught staring this softly at humans of any description. Only the house elf's attitude of crippling servility looked convincing. With a grin at the thought of what Hermione would say if she could see the statue of the elf, Harry turned his money bag upside down and emptied not just 10 gallons, but the whole contents into the pool at the statue's feet. I would too, Harry. I would too. I knew it! Yelled Ron, punching the air. You always get away with stuff. They were bound to clear you, said Hermione, who had looked positively faint with anxiety when Harry had entered the kitchen and was now holding a shaking hand over her eyes. There's no case against you. None at all. Everyone seems quite relieved, though considering how they all knew I'd get off, said Harry, smiling. Mrs. Weasley was wiping her face on an apron. Well, just imagine my shirt's an apron. And Fred, George, and Ginny were doing a kind of word dance to a tune that went, he got off! He got off! He got off! That's enough. Settle down, shouted Mr. Weasley, though he too was smiling. Listen, Sirius. Lucius Malfoy was at the ministry. What? Said Sirius sharply. He got off! He got off! He got off! Be quiet, you three. Yes, we saw him talking to Fudge on level 9. Then they went up to Fudge's office together. Dumbledore ought to know. Absolutely, said Sirius. We'll tell him, don't worry. Well, I'd better get going. There's a vomiting toilet in Bethnal Green waiting for me. Molly, I'll be late. I'm covering for Tonks. But Kingsley might be dropping in for dinner. He got off! He got off! He got off! That's enough, Fred, George, Jenny, said Mrs. Weasley as Mr. Weasley left the kitchen. Harry, dear, come and sit down. Have some lunch. You hardly ate breakfast. Ron and Hermione sat themselves down opposite him, looking happier than they had done since he had first arrived at number 12 Grimmauld Place. And Harry's feeling of giddy relief, which had been somewhat dented by his encounter with Lucius Malfoy, swelled again. The gloomy house seemed warmer and more welcoming all of a sudden. Even Creature looked less ugly as he poked his snout-like nose into the kitchen to investigate the source of all the noise. Oh, Creature, we love you anyway. Of course, once Dumbledore turned up on your side, there was no way they were going to convict you, said Ron happily, now dishing great amounts of mashed potatoes onto everyone's plates. I love mashed potatoes. What if there was brown gravy? Those are the best kind. Yeah, he swung it for me, said Harry. He felt that it would sound highly ungrateful, not to mention childish to say, I wish he'd talked to me, though, or even looked at me. And as he thought this, the scar on his forehead burned so badly that he clapped his hand to it. What's up? Said Hermione, looking alarmed. Scar, Harry mumbled. But it's nothing. It happens all the time now. None of the others had noticed a thing. All of them were now helping themselves to food, while gloating over Harry's narrow escape. Fred, George, and Ginny were still singing. He got off! He got off! He got off! Added for good measure. Hermione looked rather anxious, but before she could say anything, Ron said happily, I bet Dumbledore turns up this evening to celebrate with us, you know. I don't think he'll be able to, Ron, said Mrs. Weasley, setting a huge plate of roast chicken down in front of Harry. That just sounds so good. He's really very busy at the moment. He got off! He got off! He got off! Shut up! Roared Mrs. Weasley. Oh, Molly, you love your kids all the same. Over the next few days, Harry could not help noticing that there was one person within number 12, Grimmauld Place, who did not seem wholly overjoyed that he would be returning to Hogwarts. Sirius had put up a very good show of happiness on first hearing the news. Wringing Harry's hand, and beaming just like the rest of them. Soon, however, he was moodier and surlier than before, talking less to everybody, even Harry, and spending increasing amounts of time shut up in his mother's room with Buckbeak. Don't go feeling guilty, said Hermione sternly, after Harry had confided some of his feelings to her and Ron while they scrubbed out a moldy cupboard on the third floor a few days later. You've been alone at Hogwarts and Sirius knows it. Personally, I think he's being selfish. That's a bit harsh, Hermione, said Ron, frowning as he attempted to prise off a bit of mold that attached itself firmly to his finger. I don't want to be stuck inside this house without company. They don't have company, said Hermione. It's headquarters to the Order of the Phoenix, isn't it? He just got his hopes up that Harry would be coming here to live with him. I don't think that's true, said Harry, wringing off his cloth. Well, imagine my hair's a cloth. He wouldn't give me a straight answer when I asked him if I could. He just didn't want to get his own hopes up even more, said Hermione wisely. And he probably felt a bit guilty himself, because I think a part of him was really hoping you'd be expelled. Then you'd both be outcast together. She brings up a good point, and a point that should be considered, you know? Come off it, said Harry and Ron together, but Hermione merely shrugged. Suit yourselves, but sometimes I think Ron's mum's right. And Sirius gets confused about whether you're you or your father, Harry. So you think he's touched in the head, said Harry heatedly. No, I just think he's been very lonely for a long time. Another good point to consider. Said Hermione simply. At this point, Mrs. Weasley entered the bedroom behind them. Still not finished, she said, poking her head into the cupboard. I thought you might be here to tell us to have a break, said Ron bitterly. Do you know how much mold we've got rid of since we arrived here? You were so keen to help the Order, said Mrs. Weasley. You can do your bit by making headquarters fit to live in. She has a good point. A classic case of be careful what you wish for. I feel like a house elf, grumbled Ron. Now that you understand what dreadful lives they lead, perhaps you'll be a bit more active in SPEW, said Hermione hopefully, as Mrs. Weasley left them to it again. You know, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to show people exactly how horrible it is to clean all the time. We could do a sponsored scrub of Gryffindor Common Room. All proceeds to SPEW. It would raise awareness as well as funds. I would do it with you, Hermione. Because you have a point. And I think it would be interesting to see how many people gathered together for this cause. I'll sponsor you to shut up about spew, Ron muttered irritably, but only so Harry could hear him. Harry found himself daydreaming about Hogwarts more and more as the end of the holidays approached. He could not wait to see Hagrid again, to play Quidditch, even to stroll across the vegetable patches to the herbology greenhouses. It would be a treat just to leave this dusty, musty house, where half of the cupboards were still bolted shut, and Creature wheezed insults out of the shadows as he passed. Though Harry was careful not to say any of this within earshot of Sirius. Oof. I have to let my head breathe. The fact was that living at the headquarters of the anti-Voldemort movement was not nearly as interesting or exciting as Harry thought, or as Harry would have expected before he'd experienced it. Though members of the Order of the Phoenix came and went regularly, sometimes staying for meals, sometimes only for a few minutes of whispered conversation, Mrs. Weasley made sure that Harry and the others were kept well out of earshot, whether extendable or normal. And nobody, not even Sirius, seemed to feel that Harry needed to know anything more than he heard on the night of his arrival. On the very last day of the holidays, Harry was sweeping up Hedwig's droppings from the top of the wardrobe when Ron entered their bedroom carrying a couple of envelopes. "Book lists have arrived," he said, throwing one of the envelopes up to Harry, who was standing on a chair. "About time. I thought they'd forgotten. They usually come much earlier than this." Harry swept the last of the droppings into a rubbish bag and threw it in over Ron's head into the waste paper basket in the corner, which swallowed it and belched wildly. "Okay, where can we get a waste bin like this? Because that would just be so incredibly helpful." He then opened his letter. It contained 2 pieces of parchment. One the usual reminder that term started on the 1st of September, the other telling him which books he would need for the coming year. "Only 2 new ones," he said, reading the list. "The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 5, by Miranda Goshaw, and Defensive Magical Theory, by Wilbert Slinkard." Crack. Fred and George apparated right beside Harry. He was so used to them doing this by now that he didn't even fall off his chair. "We were just wondering who assigned the Slinkard book," said Fred conversationally. Oh, this is yet another start to a particular someone's antics. Advanced Potterheads, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Newcomers, keep listening. Because it means Dumbledore's found a new defense against the Dark Arts teacher," said George. "And about time, too," said Fred. "What do you mean?" Harry asked, jumping down beside them. "Well, we overheard Mum and Dad talking on the extendable ears a few weeks back," Fred told Harry. "And from what they were saying, Dumbledore was having real trouble finding anyone to do the job this year." "Not surprising, is it, when you look at what's happened the last 4, said George. "One sacked, one dead, one's memory removed, and one locked in the trunk for 9 months," said Harry, counting them off on his fingers. "Yeah, I see what you mean." "What's up with you, Ron?" asked Fred. Ron did not answer. Harry looked around. Ron was standing very still with his mouth slightly open, gaping at his letter from Hogwarts. "What's the matter?" said Fred impatiently, moving around Ron to look over his shoulder at the parchment. Fred's mouth fell open too. "Prefect?" he said, staring incredulously at the letter. "Prefect?" George leapt forward and seized the envelope in Ron's other hand and turned it upside down. Harry saw something scarlet and gold fall into George's palm. "No way," said George in a hushed voice. "It's been a mistake," said Fred, snatching the letter out of Ron's grasp and holding it up to the light as though checking for a watermark. "No one in their right mind would make Ron a prefect." The twins' heads turned in unison, and both of them stared at Harry. "We thought you were hurt," said Fred in a tone that suggested Harry had tricked them in some way. "We thought Dumbledore was bound to pick you," said George indignantly. "Winning the Triwizard and everything," said Fred. "Suppose all the math stuff must have counted against him," said George to Fred. "Yeah," said Fred slowly. "Yeah, you've caused too much trouble, right? Well, at least one of you's got the priorities right." He strode over to Harry and clapped him on the back while giving Ron a scathing look. Okay, I'm gonna channel my inner Molly and be like this. Fred, George, be nice to your younger brother. You should be celebrating the joy, not mocking him for it. Excuse me. Prefect! Echo Ronnie the prefect! Oh, Mom's going to be revolting, groaned George, thrusting the prefect badge back at Ron, as though it might contaminate him. Ron, who still had not said a word, took the badge, stared at it for a moment, then held it out to Harry as though asking mutely for confirmation it was genuine. Harry took it. A large P was superimposed on the Gryffindor line. He had seen a badge just like this on Percy's chest on his very first day at Hogwarts. And for somewhat of a visual, there's the illustration. The door banged open. Hermione came tearing into the room, her cheeks flushed and her hair flying. I don't know if you'd call that flying, but I tried. There was an envelope in her hand. Did you get? She spotted the badge in Harry's hand and let out a shriek, which I will attempt for my Lily's sake, as well as my family's. I knew it! She said excitedly, brandishing her letter. Okay, not an envelope, but just pretend it's her letter. Me too, Harry, me too! No, said Harry quickly, pushing the badge back into Ron's hand. It's Ron, not me. What? Ron's prefect, not me, Harry said. Ron, said Hermione, her jaw dropping. But are you sure? I mean, she turned red as Ron looked around at her with a defiant expression on his face. It's my name on the letter, he said. Said Hermione, looking thoroughly bewildered. Wow! Well done, Ron! That's pretty unexpected, said George, nodding. Okay, I'll give you that one, George. It certainly is a little unexpected. No, said her wrong voice. No, said Hermione, blushing harder than ever. Oh, she's proud of Ron. No, it's not. Ron's done loads of. He's really. The door behind her opened a little wider, and Mrs. Weasley backed into the room carrying a pile of freshly laundered robes. Ginny said the book list had come at last, she said, glancing around all the envelopes as she made her way over the bed and started sorting the robes into two piles. If you give them to me, I'll take them over to Diet Gun Alley this afternoon and get your books while you're packing. Ron, I'll have to get you more pajamas. These are at least 6 inches too short. Can't believe how fast you're growing. What color would you like? Get him red and gold to match his badge, said George, smirking. But, said Mrs. Weasley, absently rolling up a pair of maroon socks and placing them on Ron's pile. His badge, said Fred, with the air of getting the worst over quickly. His lovely shiny new prefect's badge. Fred's words took a moment to penetrate Mrs. Weasley's preoccupation about pajamas. Ron, you're not. Ron held up his badge. Mrs. Weasley let out a shriek, just like Hermione's. And just like Hermione's, I will not attack for the sake of my family. Oh, I don't believe it! I don't believe it! Oh, Ron, how wonderful! A prefect! That's everyone in the family! What are Fred and I, next door neighbors? Said George indignantly, as his mother pushed him aside and put her arms around her youngest son. Wait until your father hears. Ron, I'm so proud of you! What's wonderful news! You could have had boys just like Bill and Percy. It's the first step of what a thing to happen in the middle of all this work. I'm just through. Oh, Ronnie! Fred and George were making loud retching noises behind her back. But Mrs. Weasley did not notice. Arms tight around Ron's neck, she was kissing him all over her face, which had turned a brighter scarlet than his badge. Okay, I won't do the kiss, but just imagine this is the hug. And no for my 10 hugs. Mom, don't. Mom, get a grip, he muttered, trying to push her away. She let go of him and said breathlessly, "Well, what will it be? We gave Percy an owl, but you've already got one, of course." What do you mean? Said Ron, looking as though he did not dare believe his ears. Excuse me. You've got to have a reward for this, said Mrs. Weasley fondly. How about a nice new set of dress robes? We've already bought him some, said Fred sourly, who looked as though he sincerely regretted this generosity. Okay, I have a headcanon for these. Ron's dress robes that was given to him by Fred and George were worn during his wedding. Think about it. Ron is going through some of his stuff at the Burrow, and he comes across this parcel. And then when he opens it and sees these robes again, they're actually very nice. And he decides that he's going to wear them when he gets married. That would just... Okay. That would just be so beautiful. I'm sorry. Advanced Potterheads know why I'm starting to tear up at this. But that would just be so beautiful. Moving forward. Or new cauldron. Oh, wrong voice. Or new cauldron. Charlie's old one's rusting through. Or new rat. It looks like Scabbers. Mum, said Ron hopefully, can I have a new broom? Mrs. Weasley's face fell slightly. Broomsticks were expensive. Not a really good one, Ron hastened to add. Just a new one for a change. Mrs. Weasley hesitated, then smiled. Of course you can. Well, I'd better get going if I've got a broom to buy too. I'll see you all later. Little Ronnie, a prefect! And don't forget to pack your trunks. A prefect! Oh, I'm off of a dither! She gave Ron yet another kiss on the cheek, sniffed loudly, and bustled from the room. Fred and George exchanged looks. You don't mind if we kiss you, do you, Ron? Said Fred in a falsely anxious voice. We could curtsy if you like, said George. Oh, shut up, said Ron, scowling at them. Or what? Said Fred, an evil grin spreading across his face. Going to put us into detention? I'd love to see him try, snickered George. He could if you don't watch out, said Hermione angrily, at which Fred and George burst out laughing and Ron muttered, Drop it, Hermione. We're gonna Have to watch our step, George, said Fred, pretending to tremble. With these two on our case. Yeah, looks like our law-breaking days are finally over, said George, shaking his head. There was another loud crack. Oh, wait. Okay. And the twins disapparated. Those two! Said Hermione, furiously staring up at the ceiling, through which they could now hear Fred and George roaring with laughter in the room upstairs. Don't pay any attention to them, Ron. They're only jealous. I don't think they are, said Ron doubtfully, also looking up at the ceiling. They've always said that only prats become prefects. Still, he added on a happier note, they've never had new brooms. I wish I could go with Mum and choose. She'll never be able to afford a Nimbus. There's the new Queen Sleep out. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I think I'll go and tell her I like the Queen Sleep, just so she knows. He dashed from the room, leaving Harry and Hermione alone. For some reason, Harry found that he did not want to look at Hermione. He turned to his bed, picked up the pile of clean robes Mrs. Weasley had laid upon it, and crossed the room to his trunk. Harry? Said Hermione tentatively. Not done, said Harry so heartily it did not sound like his voice at all, and still not looking at her. Brilliant. Perfect. Great. Thanks, said Hermione. Harry, could I borrow Hedwig so I can tell Mum and Dad? They'll be really pleased. I mean, prefect is something they can understand. Oh. I'm hugging Hermione. And I'm hugging her because imagine you're a Muggleborn. You want to share this wizarding information with your loved ones so much, but they just can't understand it. And you feel distant from them because of that. I wonder if Hermione is feeling that way. And if she is, that would explain her excitement and enthusiasm to share this with her parents, because this is something, as she says, they'll understand. They'll have something to finally connect over in 5 years. That's gotta be monumental for Hermione. As well as that's gotta be monumental for Hermione. Because I know if I were in her shoes, I definitely would want to let my family know too. Connect with them over that. And I just feel for a lot of Muggleborns, because, like I said, if you're a Muggleborn, then you want to share this magical information so much with your family members, but they can't understand you, and that leaves you distant, and that leaves you feel isolated from them, because you don't know what to talk about, since your magical side has been all you've known for a while. So yeah, my heart goes out to Hermione and all Muggleborns, because they're probably in this same situation. So this is why I'm hugging Hermione. Yeah, no problem, said Harry in the horrible, hearty voice that did not belong to him. Take her. He leaned over his trunk, laid the robes on the bottom of it, and pretended to be rummaging for something low. Hermione crossed to the wardrobe and called Hedwig down. A few moments passed. Harry heard the door close, but remained bent double, listening. The only sounds he could hear were the blank picture on the wall, snickering again. and the waste paper basket in the corner, coughing up the outdroppings. He straightened up and looked behind him. Hermione and Hedwig had gone. Harry returned slowly to his bed and sank into it, gazing unseeingly at the foot of the wardrobe. Yet he had forgotten completely about prefects being chosen in the 5th year. He had been too anxious about the possibility of being expelled to spare a thought for the fact that badges must be leaning their way towards certain people. But if he had remembered, if he had thought about it, what would he have expected? Not this, said a small and truthful voice inside his head. Harry screwed up his face and buried it in his hands. He could not lie to himself. If he had known the prefect badge was on its way, he would have expected it to come to him, not Ron. Did this make him as arrogant as Draco Malfoy? Did he think himself superior to everyone else? Did he really believe he was better than Ron? No, said the small voice defiantly. Is that true? Harry wondered, anxiously probing his own feelings. I'm better at Quidditch, said the voice, but I'm not better at anything else. That was definitely true, Harry thought. He was no better than Ron and Lessons. But what about outside lessons? What about those adventures he, Ron, and Hermione had together since they had started at Hogwarts, often risking much worse than expulsion? Anyone else thinking of the line? Now, if you two don't mind, I'm going to bed before either of you come up with another clever idea to get us killed, or worse, expelled. And yes, that is the film line because, well, this is Order of the Phoenix. Sorcerer's Stone was 4 books ago, and the film is what I remember most. So, again, does that line come to anyone's mind? Well, Ron and Hermione were with me most of the time, said the voice in Harry's head. Not all the time, though, Harry argued with himself. They didn't fight Pearl with me. They didn't take on Riddle and the Basilisk. They didn't get rid of all those Dementors the night Sirius escaped. They weren't in that graveyard with me the night Voldemort returned. And the same feeling of ill usage that had overwhelmed him on the night he had arrived rose again. I've definitely done more, Harry thought indignantly. I've done more than either of them. But maybe, said the small voice fairly, maybe Dumbledore doesn't choose prefects because they've got themselves into a load of dangerous situations. Maybe he chooses them for other reasons. Ron must have something you don't. Harry opened his eyes and stared through his fingers at the wardrobe's clawed feet, remembering what Fred had said. No one in their right mind would make Ron a prefect. Harry gave a small snort of laughter. A second later, he felt sickened with himself. Ron had not asked Dumbledore to give him the prefect badge. This was not Ron's fault. Was he, Harry, Ron's best friend in the world, going to sulk because he didn't have a badge? Laugh with the twins behind Ron's back? Ruin this for Ron, when for the first time he had beaten Harry at something? No. I say no because I definitely wouldn't if it were me. What about you? In fact, I would support this, I'd support this joy, this accomplishment that deserves such celebration. So yes, I would celebrate and not let it get to me. I'd show my support, not my bitterness. Moving forth. At this point, Harry heard Ron's footsteps on the stairs again. He stood up, straightened his glasses, and hitched a grin onto his face as Ron bounded back through the door. Just caught her, he said happily. She says she'll get the clean sleep if she can. Cool, Harry said, and he was relieved to hear that his voice had stopped sounding hearty. Listen, Ron, well done, mate. The smile faded off Ron's face. I never thought it would be me, he said, shaking his head. I thought it would be you. Nah, I've caused too much trouble, Harry said, echoing Fred. Yeah, said Ron. Yeah, I suppose. Well, we'd better get our trunks packed, hadn't we? It was odd how widely their possessions seemed to have scattered themselves since they had arrived. It took most of the afternoon to retrieve their books and belongings from all over the house, then stow them back inside their school trunks. Harry noticed that Ron kept moving his prefix badge around, first placing it on his bedside table, then putting it into his jeans pocket. Ooh. I do not like jeans, and the fact that if the pin accidentally has its back removed from movement, and yeah, you can see where I'm going with this, can't you? Then taking it out and laying it on his folded robes, as though to see the effect of the red on the black. Only when Fred and George dropped in and offered to attach it to his forehead with a permanent sticking charm did he wrap it tenderly in his maroon socks and lock it in his trunk. Yeah, I don't think you want to do that, Fred and George. Mrs. Weasley returned from Diagon Alley around 6 o'clock, laden with books and carrying a long package wrapped in thick brown paper that Ron took from her with a moan of longing. Never mind unwrapping it now. People are arriving for dinner. I want you all downstairs, she said. But the moment she was out of sight, Ron ripped off the paper in a frenzy and examined every inch of his new room, an ecstatic expression on his face. I can relate. I once, okay, my grandma placed an order for some things that were Christmas. She forgot about it. I didn't know about it. So I asked her if I could open it. She said I can go ahead. So when I opened it, I got out of the thing and I'm just like, woo! Needless to say, I got one of my Christmas gifts early that time. Because after I got it, I was just like, Bill, hide this box. Bill's my father figure. Bill, hide this box. It's Christmas. So yes, needless to say, I got one of my Christmas gifts early. But yeah, I can definitely relate to the enthusiasm Ron has here. Moving forth. Down in the basement, Mrs. Weasley had hung a scarlet. Okay. Down in the basement, Mrs. Weasley hung a scarlet banner over the heavily wadding dinner table, which read, "Congratulations, Ron and Hermione. New prefix." She looked in a better mood than Harry had seen her all holiday. "I thought we'd have a little party, not a sit-down dinner," she told Harry, Ron, Hermione, Fred, George, and Ginny as they entered the room. "Your father and Bill are on their way, Ron. I've sent them both out and they're thrilled," she added meaningly. Fred rolled his eyes. Sirius, Lupin, Tonks, and Kingsley Shacklebolt were already there, and Mad-Eye Moody stumped in shortly after Harry had got himself a butterbeer. Which, if you want to make, you know what video to watch. If not, I'll leave it in the description. "Oh, Alistair, I'm glad you're here," said Mrs. Weasley brightly, as Mad-Eye shrugged off his traveling cloak. "We've been wanting to ask you for ages. Could you have a look in the writing desk, in the drawing room and tell us what's inside. We haven't wanted to open it just in case it's something really nasty. No problem, Molly. Moody's electric blue eyes swiveled upward and stared fixedly on through the ceiling of the kitchen. Drawing room, he growled as the pupil contracted. Desk in the corner? Yeah, I see it. Yeah, it's a bother. Want me to go up and get rid of it, Molly? No, I'll do it myself later, beamed Mrs. Weasley. You have a drink. We're having a bit of a celebration, actually. She gestured at the Scarlet banner. Fourth prefect in the family, she said, fondly ruffling Ron's hair. Prefect, eh? Growled Moody, his normal eye on Ron and his magical eyes swiveling around to gaze into the side of his head. Harry had the very uncomfortable feeling it was looking at him, and moved away towards Sirius and Lupin. Well, congratulations, said Moody, still glaring at Ron with his normal eye. But their authority figures always attract trouble. But I suppose Dumbledore thinks you can withstand most major jinxes, or he wouldn't have appointed you. Ron looked rather startled at this view of the matter, but saved the trouble of responding by the arrival of his father and eldest brother. Mrs. Weasley was in such a good mood that she didn't even complain that they had brought Mundungus with them, too. He was wearing a warm overcoat that seemed awfully lumpy in unlikely places, and declined the offer to remove it, and put it with Moody's traveling cloak. Well, I think a toast is in order, said Mr. Weasley when everyone had a drink. He raised his goblet. Well, again, this is no goblet, but just imagine it is. Who knew plates could have so many versatile uses? To Ron and Hermione, the new Gryffindor prefects. Ron and Hermione beamed as everyone drank to them and then applauded. I was never a prefect myself, said Tonks brightly from behind Harry, as everybody moved toward the table to help themselves to food. Her hair was tomato red and waist-length today. She looked like Ginny's older sister. That's a pretty image. My head of house said I lacked certain necessary qualities. Like what? Said Ginny, who was choosing a baked potato. Those are good. I like mine with sour cream and parsley, as well as butter. What do you guys like yours with? The ability to behave myself, said Tonks. And just like myself, Ginny laughed. Hermione looked as though she did not know whether to smile or not, and compromised by taking an extra large gulp of butterbeer and choking on it. Oof. Oh, Hermione, we love you. What about you, Sirius? Ginny asked, thumping Hermione on the back. I know that was more like the back of my neck, but it was all I could reach. Sirius, who was right beside Harry, but out his usual bark like laughed. No one would have made me a prefect. I spent too much time in detention with James. Lupin was the good boy. He called the badge. I think Dumbledore might have hoped I would be able to exercise control over my best friends, said Lupin, and he'd scarcely say that I failed dismally. Harry's mood suddenly lifted. His father had not been a prefect either. All at once the party seemed much more enjoyable. He loaded up his plate, feeling unusually fond of everyone in the room. Ron was rhapsodizing about his new broom to anybody who would listen. I would. Not to 70 in 10 seconds, Not bad, is it? When you think the common 290 is only not to 60. And that's with a decent entitlement according to which broomstick. Marnie was talking very earnestly to Lupin about her view of elf rights. I mean, it's the same kind of nonsense as werewolf segregation, isn't it? It stems from this... Okay. I mean, it's the same kind of nonsense as werewolf segregation, isn't it? It all stems from this horrible thing wizards have, thinking they're superior to other creatures. Mrs. Weasley and Bill were having their usual argument about Bill's hair. Getting really out of hand, and you're so good looking. It would look much better shorter, wouldn't it, Harry? I don't know, said Harry, slightly alarmed at being asked his opinion. He slid away from them in the direction of Fred and George, who were huddled in the corner with Mundungus. Mundungus stopped talking when he saw Harry, but Fred winked and beckoned Harry closer. It's okay, he told Mundungus. We can trust Harry. He's our financial backer. Look what Dun's gotten us, said George, holding out his hand to Harry. It was full of like shriveled black pods. A faint rattling noise was coming from them, even though they were completely stationary. Okay, I would like to address that Dun is an interesting nickname, considering what Dun is. I mean, have you ever heard of a Dun beetle? That, if you have an idea of what Dun can mean. So I think you could come up with a more fitting nickname than that, Fred and George. Moving forth. Venomous tentacles, said George. We need them for the sniving sack boxes, but they're a C-class non-tradable substance, so I've been having a bit of trouble getting a hold of them. 10 galleons a lot then, Dun, said Fred. With all the trouble I went to get them, said Mundungus, his saggy bloodshot eyes stretching even wider. I'm sorry, lads, but I'm not taking a nut under 20. Dun likes his little joke, Fred said to Harry. Yeah, his best one so far has been 6 sickles for a bag of narquils, said George. Be careful. Harry warned them quietly. What? Said Fred. Mom's busy going over Prefect Ron. We're okay. But Moody could have his eye on you, Harry pointed out. The Dungus looked nervously over his shoulder. Good point, that, he grunted. All right, lads, 10 it is, if you'll take them quick. Cheers, Harry, said Fred delightedly when Mundungus had emptied his pockets into the twins' outstretched hands and scuttled off toward the food. We'd better get these upstairs. Harry watched them go, feeling slightly uneasy. It had just occurred to him that Mr. and Mrs. Weasley would want to know how Fred and George were financing their joke shop business when, as was inevitable, they finally found out about it. Giving the twins his tri-wizard winnings seemed like a simple thing to do at the time. But what if it led to another family row and a Percy-like estrangement? Would Mrs. Weasley still feel that Harry was as good as her son if she had found out he had made it possible for Fred and George to start a career she thought quite unsuitable? Standing where the twins had left him with nothing but a guilty weight in the pit of his stomach for company, Harry caught the sound of his own name. Kingsley Shackleton's deep voice was audible, even over the surrounding chatter. Why Dumbledore didn't make Potter a prefect? He'll have had his reasons, replied Lupin. But it would have shown confidence in him. It's what I would have done, persisted Kingsley, especially with the Daily Prophet having a go at him every few days. Harry did not look around. He did not want Lupin or Kingsley to know he had heard. He followed Matungus back toward the table, though not remotely hungry. His pleasure in the party had evaporated as quickly as it had come. He wished he were upstairs in bed. Mad-Eye Moody was sniffing at a chicken leg with what remained of his nose. Evidently he could not detect any trace of poison, because he then tore a strip off it with his teeth. Yummy chicken. The hound was made of Spanish oak, with anti-jinx varnish and built-in vibration control, Ron was saying to Tonks. Mrs. Weasley yawned widely. I think that's the first time I've not yawned when I read someone yawning. So that's why I was silent. I was waiting for the yawn, and it didn't come, so I'm just like, why? Like, it threw me off. Moving forth. Well, I think I'll sort out that pocket before I turn in. Arthur, I don't want to start up too late, alright? Night, Harry dear. She left the kitchen. Harry set down his plate and wondered whether he could follow her without attracting attention. You're right, Potter, grunted Moody. Yeah, fine, lied Harry. Moody took a swig from his hip flask, his electric blue eyes staring sideways at Harry. Come here, I got something that might interest you, he said. From an inner pocket of his robes, Moody pulled out a very tattered old wizarding photograph. Original Order of the Phoenix, growled Moody. Found it last night when I was looking for my spare invisibility cloak. Seeing as how Podmore hasn't had the manners to return my best one, thought people might like to see it. Harry took the photograph. A small crowd of people, some waving at him, others lifting their glasses, looked back up at him. There's me, said Moody unnecessarily, pointing at himself. The Moody in the picture was unmistakable, and though his hair was slightly less gray and his nose was intact, and there's Dumbledore beside me, Deadly Diggle on the other side. That's Marlene McKinnon. She was killed 2 weeks after this was taken. They got her whole family. That's Frank and Alice Longbottom. Harry's stomach, already uncomfortable, clenched as he looked at Alice Longbottom. He knew her round, friendly face very well, even though he had never met her. Foreshadowing. Because she was the image of her son, Neville. Oh, family, growled Moody. Better dead than what happened to them. And that's Emmeline Vance. You've met her. And there's Lupin, obviously. Benji Fenwick, he copped it too. We only ever found bits of him. Shift aside, he added, poking the picture, and the little photographic people moved sideways, so that those who were partially obscured could move to the front. That's Edgar Bones, brother of Amelia Bones. They got him and his family too. He was a great wizard. Sturgis Podmore. Blimey, he looks young. Caradoc Dearborn vanished 6 months after this. We never found his body. Hagrid, of course, looks exactly the same as ever. Alphias Dodge, you've met him. I've forgotten he used to wear that stupid hat. Gideon Prewett. It took 5 Death Eaters to kill him and his brother Fabian. They fought like heroes. Button on. And this is, okay, for those who don't know, Molly was previously a Prewett. Therefore, Fabian and Gideon are her brothers. Just a little bit of a background for you. The little people in the photograph jostled amongst themselves, and those hidden right at the back appeared at the forefront of the picture. That's Dumbledore's brother, Aberforth. Only time I ever met him. Strange bloke. Foreshadowing! That's Dorcas Meadows, Voldemort killed her personally. Sirius when he still had short hair. I wonder how short. Would it be like this? Or would it be like I wanted to know. I also want to know how younger Sirius would work. I know many other fans have casted Ben Barnes as a younger Sirius, but personally, I know him as Caspian, aka King Cuteness. You'll hear more about that when we reach Narnia. But in the meantime, let's get back to this. And there you go. Thought that would interest you. Harry's heart turned over. His mother and father were beaming up at him, sitting on either side of a small, watery-eyed man Harry recognized at once as Wormtail. He was the one who had betrayed their whereabouts to Voldemort, and helped bring about their deaths. Said Moody. Harry looked up into Moody's heavily scarred and pitted face. Evidently, Moody was under the impression he had just given Harry a bit of a treat. I personally see it as such. I mean, learning about the past is fascinating, don't you think? I mean, obviously there's some historical moments I'm not fond of learning about, because they don't align with my interests, but overall, learning from the past is interesting, is it not? Yeah, said Harry, attempting to grin again. Listen, I've just remembered. I've unpacked mine. He was spared the trouble of inventing an object he had not packed. Sirius had just said, "What's that you've got there, Mad-Eye?" And Moody had turned toward him. Harry crossed the kitchen, slipped through the door, and up the stairs before anyone could call him back. He did not know why he had received such a shock. He'd seen his parents' pictures before, and after all, and he had met Wormtail, but to have them sprung on him like that when he was least expecting it, no one would like that, he thought angrily. And then to see them surrounded by all those other happy faces. Benji Fenwick, who had been found in bits, Gideon Prewett, who had died like a hero, and the Longbottoms, who had been tortured into madness, all waving happily out of the photograph forevermore, not knowing they were doomed. Well, Moody might find that interesting. Harry, found it disturbing. Harry tiptoed up the stairs in the hall past the stuffed elf heads, glad to be on his own again. But as he approached the first landing, he heard noises. Someone was sobbing in the drawing room. "Hello?" Harry said. There was no answer, but the sobbing continued. He climbed the remaining stairs 2 at a time, walked across the landing, and opened the drawing room door. Someone was cowering against the dark wall, her wand in her hand, her whole body shaking with sobs. Sprawled on the dusty old carpet in the patch of moonlight, clearly dead, was Ron. All the air seemed to vanish from Harry's lungs. He felt as though he were falling to the floor. His brain turned icy cold. Ron dead? No, it couldn't be. But wait a moment. It couldn't be. Ron was downstairs. "Mrs. Weasley," Harry croaked. "Ridiculous!" Mrs. Weasley sobbed, pointing her shaking wand at Ron's body. Crack. Ron's body turned into bills, spread-eagled on his back, his eyes wide open and empty. Mrs. Weasley sobbed harder than ever. "Ridiculous!" she sobbed again. Crack. Mr. Weasley's body replaced Bill's, his glasses askew, trickle of blood running down his face. Mrs. Weasley moaned. "No, ridiculous! Ridiculous! Ridiculous!" Crack, dead twins. Crack, dead Percy. Crack, dead Harry. And this is just so heartwarming as it is tear-jerking. Especially when you consider this is Molly's point of view, briefly. Because, again, as she addressed earlier in the book, Harry is as good as a son to her. Mrs. Weasley, just get out of here! Shouted Harry, staring down at his own dead body on the floor. It's someone else. What's going on? Okay, another point that I just briefly forgot to mention. Imagine, okay, advanced Potterheads know what happens to the twins. Newcomers, you're gonna have to wait, but just imagine seeing any of your beloved family members gone. That would make you hurt. And honestly, I can relate to Molly because my greatest fear is losing my loved ones as well. Moving forth. Lupin had come running into the room, closely followed by Sirius, with Moody stumping along behind them. Lupin looked from Mrs. Weasley to the dead herring on the floor, and seemed to understand in an instant. Pulling out his own wand, he said very firmly and clearly, "Ridiculous!" Harry's body vanished. A silvery orb hung in the air over the spot where it had lain. Lupin waved his wand once more, and the orb vanished in a puff of smoke. Oh, gulped Mrs. Weasley, and she broke into a storm of crying, her face in her hands. "Molly," said Lupin bleakly, walking over to her. "Molly, don't." Next second, she was sobbing her heart out on Lupin's shoulder. "Molly, it was just a poggart," he said soothingly, patting her on the head. "Just a stupid poggart. I see them dead all the time." Mrs. Weasley moaned into his shoulder. "All the time. I dream about it." Oh. And the fact that hugging Mrs. Weasley. Sirius was staring at the patch of carpet where the boggart, pretending to be Harry's body, had lain. Moody was looking at Harry, who avoided his gaze. He had a funny feeling Moody's magical eye had followed him all the way out of the kitchen. Don't tell Arthur." Mrs. Weasley was gulping now, mopping her eyes frantically with her cuffs. "I don't want him to know." "Being silly." Lupin handed her a handkerchief and she blew her nose. I know that was probably not the most convincing thing ever, but bear with me. "Harry, I'm so sorry. What must you think of me?" she said shakily. "Well, if you want to know what I think of you, Molly, I think it shows that you care about those you love. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because like I've addressed earlier, I have that same fear." Moving forth. "Not even able to get rid of a poggart." "Don't be stupid," said Harry, trying to smile. "I'm just so worried," she said, tears spilling out of her eyes again. "The families in the order, they'll be a miracle if we all come through this. And then Percy's not talking to us. What if something dreadful happens? And we're never made up? And what's going to happen if Arthur and I get killed? Who's going to look after Ron and Jenny?" "Molly, that's enough," said Lupin firmly. "This isn't like last time. The Order's better prepared. We've got a head start. You know what Voldemort's up to." Mrs. Weasley gave a little squeak of fright at the sound of it. "Oh, come, Molly, come on. It's about time you got used to hearing it. Look, I can't promise no one's going to get hurt. Nobody can promise that. But we're much better off than we were last time. We weren't in the Order then. You don't understand. Last time we were outnumbered 20 to 1 by the Death Eaters. They were picking off us one by one." Harry thought of the photograph again, of his parents' beaming faces. He knew Moody was still watching him. "Don't worry about Percy," said Sirius abruptly. "He'll come around." Foreshadowing. It's a matter of time before Voldemort moves into the open. Once he does, the whole ministry is going to be begging us to forgive them. I'm not so sure I'll be accepting their apology, he added bitterly. And as for who's going to look after Ron and Ginny if you and Arthur die, said Lupin, smiling slightly. What do you think we do? Let them starve? Mrs. Weasley smiled tremulously. Silly, she muttered, again mopping her eyes. But Harry, closing his bedroom door behind him some 10 minutes later, could not think Mrs. Weasley silly. He could see his parents beaming up at him from the tattered old photograph, unaware that their wives, like so many those close around him, were drawing to a close. Ooh, that's quite foreshadowing. Wow, that is in-depth foreshadowing there, JKR. Checkis. The image of the Boggart posing as the corpse of each member of Mrs. Weasley's family, in turn, kept flashing before his eyes. Without warning, the scar on his forehead seared with pain again, and his stomach churned horribly. Cut it out, he said firmly, rubbing the scar as the pain receded again. First sign of madness. Talking to your own head, said a sly voice from the empty picture on the wall. Harry ignored it. He felt older than he had barely felt in his life, and it seemed extraordinary to him that barely an hour ago, he had been worried about a joke's off and who had gotten a prefix badge. And that is the end of this lengthy chapter. Join me next week for chapter 10. You don't want to miss it.